John Nichols is on the line with us. He's the Washington correspondent for The Nation, thenation.com, and also the author of the brilliant new book, Uprising. Whenever I say the title of your book, John, it reminds me of my old friend Swami Bhayandananda's saying that we need everybody in America to get wiser, figure out what's going on. We need an upwising.
I like that very much.
And
I definitely agree.
Yeah. So you've been in the UK, and there's this banking scandal going on. You've been looking into it. What have you learned?
Well, what I've learned is that we don't have much of a media when it comes to covering the real news in the world, because the Libor, L-I-B-O-R, banking scandal, which is the biggest story in Great Britain, even moving beyond the Olympics and other stories, is really a sort of a heart and soul tale of big banks and just how badly they will lie to us. What's been revealed is that the largest banks in the world, of course, have a consortium set up where they get to self-report the interest rates that they pay and that they see as appropriate for banking.
Right, this is the British Bankers Association, is it not?
Yeah.
Which is the trade association through which they do this reporting.
That's exactly right, and it's a London interbank
offered
reporting.
rate. Yeah.
And what's fascinating about it is that with very, very little regulation, the banks essentially get to set the price of money for the world. They get to decide how much they pay for money and how much they charge other people for money. Now, why that's a big deal is that these are banks, many of them, not all of them, which have been bailed out by governments. And much of that bailout money that went to them with the idea that the banks would be responsible players, that they would loan money at reasonable rates, and that they would engage in helping to keep an economy vital and functional. Mm-hmm. What we now find out is that the biggest banks in the world were lying. They were making up their reports on what they were paying for interest, what they thought the appropriate interest rate was, and they were doing so that was in a way that was dramatically to their own advantage and to the disadvantage of free market competition and of any revitalization of the economy. The governor of the Bank of England, that's the equivalent of the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board in the United States, says that what the banks did met his definition for the word fraud.
Wow.
And so we find
and Barclays, in fact, has pled guilty to criminal charges, although and paid a $435 million, as I recall, or $450 million fine. But geez, nice work if you can get it. I mean, if you or I were to walk down to the local bank and say, give me $500, I don't think we'd be able to pay a $300 fine and get off.
Well, the other thing is, too, that if we let's say you went to a bank and you falsified your credit status, you falsified your economic status, you made up, just figures right out of the sky,
you'd
actually be liable for that. You could be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Now, that's what's happened internationally, and it becomes an American scandal as well, because we learned that Tim Geithner, our Secretary of the Treasury, when he was in charge of the New York Fed, became aware of the potential for this fixing of interest rates, this falsification of interest rates, and notified the British authorities about it. But then, as best we can tell, did nothing to follow up.
Well, and in fact, the recommendations that he made to the Bank of England about this were, in some cases, lifted word for word, sentence for sentence, sentence by sentence from recommendations that had been given to him by the big banks.
Yeah.
By U.S. banks.
But even if we give him the benefit of the doubt and we say he was doing something that was useful, the fact that he became Secretary of the Treasury of the United States in a time of incredible economic stability and great debates about how to hold banks to account, and apparently did nothing to follow up on this, we found out that for the last 3 years, we've been lied to about our interest rates, about what banks are doing.
Yeah. Now, I had a theory. And this either reveals the limits of my knowledge of how this works or my insights into it. The banks were actually depressing interest rates or lying in a way that served to depress interest rates by saying that their interbank lending rates, overnight interbank lending rates, were lower than they actually were because that was a sign of strength.
That's right.
So you could argue that it was like a lie of vanity. You know, hey, we're better off than that. You don't have to worry about this. But it seems to me that if the banks are reporting a low LIBOR rate, that's the rate at which, funds are against which funds are pegged for lending. But the reality, the banks know that the reality is that the risk premium is so much higher than that they really wouldn't be willing to lend at that. And yet that's the rate at which commercial paper is being sold. That's the rate at which a corporation or a mortgage holder would have to borrow relative to. Since it's been artificially lowered, no bank is going to lend at those rates. Thus, you have a liquidity crisis. Thus, the banks are saying, on the one hand, they're saying, oh, we're just fine. We're lending at these really low rates. But then somebody comes to them and says, great, I want to start a factory. I want to expand my factory. Please lend me money. They say, no, we can't do that. We won't lend money. And that's exactly what happened. We had a year and a half there where the banks locked up and refused to lend. And I'm wondering if there's a straight line relationship between that and the lies about LIBOR.
There's simply no question that there is, Tom. In fact, this is coming out in the British inquiries into this. But it is also something else. These banks were getting money cheap and then sitting on it. And so they got the money for a very, very low rate. They did not loan it out.
Right.
They had that money in their accounts.
Well, they didn't loan it out because they were pegging the rates low in a way that would be stupid to loan out. And so they kind of tied their own hands.
But they also got money.
But to this day, John, you've got banks that are borrowing from the Fed at 0.01%, and then they're buying treasuries with that, where the U.S. Treasury Department is paying them 2% interest, and then they pay back the Fed at 0.01%. And you do this with a couple $100 billion or a couple $1 trillion, and you make millions and millions of billions of dollars in profits for doing absolutely nothing. And where's all that money coming from? All of it is coming out of tax dollars, out of the U.S. Treasury.
And there's one final thing, Tom. They're creating a false impression, as you suggested briefly there, of their own stability.
Right.
Now, this is a big deal, and it's where this thing is all going to come crumbling down because they lied to their own investors. And you are already seeing billions and billions of dollars worth of lawsuits being filed by investors saying, hold it. You created the impression of a stability that simply did not exist.
Right. It would be the equivalent of General Motors saying, when they sold 400,000 cars in a month or a quarter or whatever, saying, actually, we sold 700,000 cars. We're doing just great. And so their stock goes up 5 points. Everybody buys in. But wait a minute. And then it comes out they lied about the number of cars they sold.
This is a big scandal, Tom. And it is only beginning to get discussed in the U.S. with Bernanke being asked a little bit about it by Congress. Yeah. But we need to have a lot more attention.
But the banks own this town. They really do. There's so much power. Are they using are they spelling it LIEBOR in the British headlines yet?
No. They should be LIE-BOR.
Yeah.
But look, this is such a big scandal in Britain. It is such a front page, big deal scandal that it actually has the possibility of destabilizing the government. And so they're treating it very, very seriously. I just wish our media was treating it as seriously because it's the same banks and it's the same money.
Well, I think one of the big differences is the average Brit is actually well-informed, and the average American has infotainment when they turn TV on.
It's very true. And in Britain, they have a much more combative media, the media that is still willing to ask bankers.
And Prime Minister's questions is just the most fun thing in the world. Yes. John Nichols with The Nation, thenation.com, and author of the brilliant new book, Uprising. John, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be with you.
Thanks for the report and for getting over there and getting the story for us. It's great. We'll be right back. 15 minutes past the hour.